Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the biggest, most fascinating hurdles standing between humanity and the stars, our own biology. We talk constantly about building the rockets to get to Mars, but we almost never talk about what it actually takes to sustain generations of humans once we arrive. It's a topic that pushes the absolute boundaries of science, engineering, and ethics.
So, can humans actually reproduce in space? It's a wildly provocative question, isn't it? But it's a question that completely shifts the idea of human colonization from distant sci-fi into immediate, hard science. If we want to build permanent, self-sustaining settlements on the Moon or Mars, we absolutely have to know if human life, which has evolved under Earth's specific gravity for hundreds of millions of years, can simply continue in its sudden absence.
Here is what we are covering today. 1. The space baby problem. 2. China's orbiting embryo experiment. 3. 2 artificial embryo models. 4. Space versus ground control. 5. The artificial space womb. And 6. The ethics of off-world reproduction. Let's get right into it.
The space baby problem.
Look, let's start with the stark reality here. Space is fundamentally, biologically hostile. It actively works against us. We've got these grand ambitions for lunar and Martian colonies, but the reality is, the moment we leave Earth's protective magnetosphere and gravity, we face massive biological stressors. The human body is suddenly exposed to increased cosmic radiation, which is incredibly damaging to rapidly dividing cells, like the ones in an early embryo. It can cause severe DNA mutations and malformations. You throw microgravity into that mix, and you've got a recipe for severe developmental defects.
And as commercial spaceflight booms and space tourism becomes a real, everyday thing, experts like clinical embryologist Giles Palmer are loudly sounding the alarm. Reproductive health in space isn't speculative anymore. It is an urgently practical issue that demands our attention right now. Because honestly, if we don't start understanding these risks today, the long-term feasibility of human colonization remains one massive unsolved question mark.
Section 2. China's orbiting embryo experiment.
To actually figure these biological hurdles out, scientists are doing some unprecedented research right now in low Earth orbit. In a huge leap forward for space biology, China's recent Tiangong space station experiment managed to successfully grow artificial human embryos in orbit. In May of 2026, they launched a payload of embryo-like structures. These structures spent 5 days developing in microgravity before being frozen to halt their growth, and then they were brought safely back to Earth.
Now, I want to clarify exactly what went up there because, as project leader Yula Qian pointed out, these were not real, naturally conceived human embryos. They used stem cells. These cell clusters divide and multiply just like a normal embryo, but they don't have the ability to develop into a fetus. By using stem cells instead, researchers were able to responsibly study this incredibly critical phase of development without crossing any profound ethical lines.
Section 3. 2 artificial embryo models. The details of what they sent up are brilliant because the specific models tell us exactly what we can learn. Researchers are simulating that hypercritical 14 to 21-day window right after fertilization, the exact moment organ building blocks start to form. And they used 2 distinct models to do it. First, you have the peri-implantation model, which is cultured directly on uterine cells to mimic an embryo physically attaching to the uterine wall. Second, you have the perigastrulation model. This one is placed inside a high-tech microfluidic chip to replicate the exact moment a single layer of cells reorganizes into distinct layers. That process is what establishes the whole body axis. It literally determines head from tail.
Okay, so why is this specific window of early development so vulnerable? Well, without Earth's gravity, the very structure and organization of developing cells just starts breaking down. Microgravity significantly impairs cytoskeletal dynamics. Think of it like the internal scaffolding of a cell completely losing its structural integrity. It also messes with lineage specification, which basically means cells forget what type of tissue they're actually supposed to become. On top of all that, research shows zero gravity can literally disorient sperm cells, which severely lowers fertilization chances, and it actually causes stem cells to age prematurely.
Section 4. Space versus ground control.
Now, to truly measure the impact of this extreme environment, the experiment relied on strict scientific comparison. You can't just look at the space embryos in a vacuum, right? By maintaining an identical set of artificial embryos down here on Earth as a ground control group, scientists can isolate the exact negative impacts. The only variables changing here are the location, the microgravity level, and the radiation exposure. So when those frozen space samples get analyzed back on Earth, scientists are going to compare their microstructures and chemical makeup directly against the healthy ground samples.
And this direct comparison is absolutely crucial.
This comparative data is the very foundation we need to figure out how to mitigate developmental defects for future generations. If we are genuinely going to colonize the solar system, we have to solve the problems that these specific samples reveal. We have to know exactly what goes wrong in order to engineer a fix.
Section 5. The Artificial Space Womb.
Which brings us to a seriously mind-bending technological frontier. Because if the human body cannot naturally protect an embryo in space, then we are going to have to engineer a machine that can. Recent research papers from 2025 are already mapping out the roadmap for ectogenesis, which is gestating a human entirely outside the human body. Building on terrestrial systems that have successfully sustained premature lamb fetuses for weeks, scientists are actively conceptualizing what they call the Space-Based Artificial Womb, or SAW. We are talking about a completely autonomous incubator. A fully operational space-based artificial womb would feature a biochamber filled with synthetic amniotic fluid to regulate pH levels. It would need a highly complex placental interface pumping in oxygen, nutrients, and even simulated maternal hormones. And crucially, to fight the microgravity impacts we just talked about, the entire system would sit on a centrifuge-based artificial gravity platform spinning to perfectly simulate Earth's 1G. Add some multi-layered hydrogen-rich radiation shielding and a robotic IVF suite capable of precise micromanipulation, and you have literally designed a machine to replace the womb entirely.
Section 6. Ethics of Off-World Reproduction.
But here's the thing. Engineering the hardware is only half the battle. If we do figure out the science, we then have to navigate a completely uncharted moral landscape. And, as experts have warned, regulation delayed is regulation denied. As commercial spaceflight normalizes, the opportunity to set proactive boundaries is rapidly closing. We simply cannot wait until we have permanent settlements to establish the rules. Without global consensus and strict bioethical frameworks, unchecked commercial actors or governments could proceed with some deeply, deeply problematic reproductive activities.
Because decoupling childbirth from the human body and from Earth itself opens up massive risks. Just think about the ethical and legal hurdles for a second. Who gives consent for an embryo gestated entirely in a lab? What are the psychological impacts of engineering maternal mimicry, like simulating a heartbeat or a voice through speakers for an isolated artificial womb? There's also the severe risk of socioeconomic commodification by corporate interests, or even the terrifying possibility of using lab-gestated populations for nationalistic propaganda to claim new planetary territory.
Under current space law, no nation can claim sovereignty over a celestial body, yet astronauts are considered representatives of their home nations. But what about a child who has never once touched the Earth? If a child is gestated entirely, completely outside the womb, floating in orbit, what is their nationality? I want to leave you with this lingering thought. As we engineer our way across the cosmos, deciding who we are in space, who owns our future, and what makes us fundamentally human, well, that might just be the hardest puzzle of all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparks some curiosity.